Okay, welcome everyone. Today we will finish up. For sure, we are going to finish up for the last two chapter, chapter 79 and chapter 80 and 81. And then we will have, I believe we will finish early. So we will have time to have some general discussion and start from next week. Probably I plan to do it 2 weeks to review from 38 to 81. So from next week and the week after. Then we are going to continue our journey to Confucius Analect, start from book 16, Ji family, I think. And then probably will take another 10 to 15 weeks. And then we will come back for Tao Te Ching, the first part, the Tao part, which is from chapter 1 to 37. Then we complete our trilogy, Art of War, Analect, and Tao Te Ching. So that's a historical achievement. But anyway, okay. So let's start from chapter 80. As usual, you can read the translation you prefer, and then we will share translation by Amang and me, and then we will discuss the chapter. So let's start from chapter 80. Please raise your hand if you want to read.
Want to read?
Sure.
So we have Kwang and Joe.
Okay, so stanza 80, translation by Professor Morse Roberts. You keep the kingdom small, its people few. Make sure they have no use for tools that do the work of tens or hundreds, nor let the people travel far and leave their homes and risk their lives. Boat or cart, if kept at all, best not to ride. Shield and blade, best not to show. Guide them back to the early times when not the courts served for signs, and they took relish in their food and delight in their dress, secure in their dwellings, content in their customs, although a neighbor kingdom stood in view and the barnyard cries of cocks and dogs echoes from village to village. Their folk would never traffic to and fro, never to the last of their days.
Thank you, Kwang. Who is next? Joe, please. You are muted, Joe.
Oh, sorry. Is that,
We have two Joes, so
yeah, I didn't know if you wanted me or if you wanted the other Joe.
we are both. So
Should I just go ahead?
I can go. I mean, go ahead, Joe. I mean, I can do it next. I mean,
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I defer to you.
Sure, appreciate it. A small country has fewer people, though there are machines that can work 10 to 100 times faster than man. They are not needed. The people take death seriously and do not travel far. Though they have boats and carriages, no one uses them. Though they have armor and weapons, no one displays them. Men return to knotting of rope in place of writing. Their food is plain and good, their clothes fine but simple, their homes secure. They are happy in their ways, though they live within sight of their neighbors. And crowing cocks and barking dogs are heard across the way, yet they leave each other in peace while they grow old and die.
So Joe, who is the translator?
That's Gia Fufang.
Okay. Another Joe Finocchio.
Okay, this is Derek Lynn translation. Small country, few people. Let them have many weapons, but not use them. Let the people regard death seriously and not migrate far away. Although they have boats and chariots, They have no need to take them. Although they have armors and weapons, they have no need to display them. Let the people return to tying knots and using them. Savor their food, admire their clothes, content in their homes, happy in their customs. Neighboring countries see one another, hear the sounds of roosters and dogs from one another. People, until they grow old and die, do not go back and forth with one another.
Thank you, Joe. We have Penny. Oh,
Okay, I'm going to read Stephen Mitchell.
okay.
If a country is governed wisely, its inhabitants will be content. They enjoy the labor of their hands and don't waste time inventing labor-saving machines. Since they dearly love their homes, they aren't interested in travel. There may be a few wagons and boats, but these don't go anywhere. There may be an arsenal of weapons, but nobody ever uses them. People enjoy their food, take pleasure in being with their families, spend weekends working in their gardens, delight in the doings of the neighborhood. And even though the next country is so close that people can hear its roosters crowing and its dogs barking, they're content to die of old age without ever having gone to see it.
Right. Thank you, Penny. So let me share my screen and okay. So
Chapter 80, Not Migrating. In a small state with few people, let people have many tools, but they don't need to use them. Let people wade death so they don't migrate to distant places. There are boats and carriages, but people don't ride on them. There are armors and weapons, but people don't display them. Let people revert to the ancient way of tying knots. Let them taste their food, appreciate their clothes, settle in their homes, enjoy their customs. The neighboring states look over each other. The crowing of roosters and the barking of dogs can be heard from each other. Throughout their lives, these neighboring people have no comings and goings with each other.
okay. Thank you, Aman. To me, this chapter is very important. It's in the Taoism political philosophy. If you compare to chapter 60, the author talking about the governing a great or large state like cooking a small fish. Okay, I do believe the Taoism ideal state is a city state or small state. Okay, so that's why, and I like Professor Roberts' translation said, keep the kingdom small, right, and a few people. So that's the idea. So I always believe small state is better. That's my own belief, and here I find the Taoism idea here. And this one is a few things like to talk about. Basics is the first, let me go to the most important is the last two line, probably the most important in this text, talking about the crowing, the crowing of roosters and the barking of dogs can be heard from each other. Okay, so I think this description is very vividly, right? You can feel like, you know, the state, the village between is so close. You even can hear the sound of the rooster and the dog barking. And then, but people don't communicate, don't visit each other until their death. Okay, it sounds a little bit strange, but take as a metaphor, like kind of describe people don't bother each other. Of course, it's not practical, and you probably don't want to live this kind of life. But that's the idea. Taoism, especially Lao Tzu, is talking about. So everything you kind of anti-civilization, anti-technology. So even don't migrate, don't move. So okay, everything go back to tying knots, right? 结绳, okay, test level, okay, the weapon not use of the old way of tying knot, okay. Tie knot is before you a tradition before you have the written character. So people tie knot as for the record. So it's going back even before the ancient Sage King. Okay, even have no civilization. So let's put it this way. That's the idea of Taoism. Okay, so some part you may, let me say myself, I would like to see is small state, and then you have a weapon, but you never display, and then you enjoy your own food, you wear your own clothes, and live your own house and enjoy your own custom. But some part I may disagree, right? So for example, uh, go back to ancient way to live. But that's the idea the Taoism talking about. And when I read this one, another one I think about is regarding Gandhi's writing, Mohandas Gandhi writing in about, he called it the Hind Swaraji, that's called the Indian home rule, have the same flavor. Gandhi talking about when you build the roadway and the people become more distant. Okay, so so kind of anti-civilization. Of course, it's a controversial essay, but that's the flavor similar to Gandhi's writing. That's all I have to say. And Aman, please.
Thank you, Jason. We're one chapter from the end of the De in the Tao Te Ching, and we've opted to do this from the De first and then go and examine the Tao. And so it's worth remembering these are lessons about power, about virtue, about De, something that emanates from within and is intrinsic to a something. And here, in just less than 30 words, Lao Tzu purports a strong argument against this. I'm holding Plato's Republic, and this section of the book is Plato's Republic, which is how long it took for Plato to talk about an idyllic situation, an idyllic civilization. How is this the idyllic civilization? And why does it have to do with not migrating? It's worth remembering and getting rid of presentism when we read this. People weren't going on pleasure holidays 26 centuries ago in China, in the decadent downfall of the Zhou dynasty and the lead up to the Warring States period that was as near a war of all against all as has ever been seen. If you were leaving to go migrate someplace else, it's because the place you were leaving was just insufferable. It was impossible to stay there. This comes up a lot in Sun Tzu's Art of War, that a powerful country, a well-ran country, will draw people to it. They will migrate to it, in spite of the fact that it is a perilous thing to do. And so what Lao Tzu is talking about here is, how do you have an idyllic society? In an idyllic society, that need to migrate to the powerful country, to feel protected, to feel like there's opportunity, does not exist, because it exists within your home. You have the opportunities, you have the protection, you have the safety, you have what you need in your place. And the rest of this about being able to hear the neighboring state The modern equivalency would be you could read all the tourism pamphlets from these places that would like you to come visit and hopefully move there, but you feel no draw to move there. You feel no draw to uproot and relocate in, I don't know, pick your destination that's trying to draw people. Delaware, because we have great, corporate tax rates or whatever the case is. You don't feel the need to do that. Everything you have at home is everything you need. This is the ideal. How do you get this? It's built into small, sort of bucolic living. It's a feature that just exists when people are in harmony with each other and satisfied with their neighbors, with their town, with how things are ran. There's not a lot of top-down interference necessarily required to make this happen. People just have to be able to get along neighbor to neighbor, right in their own little village. And once they've achieved that, maybe that village expands a little bit, but you don't go to the neighbor. Maybe the neighbor's village expands a little bit, but they aren't coming to you. Perhaps over time, these two neighbors merge into one large village, one large city. Not by force, not by design, not by the edict of someone on high, but by people living successfully, comfortably, thriving. I love this chapter because it really does confront a lot of our modern notions about what is a good living situation. And the fact that it says not migrating runs afoul of our feelings of isolationism. That's not what he's preaching here. He's not saying that isolationists are who will be happy. But if you are happy, the need to abandon or flee your home isn't there. And it is the princeling, the duke, the emperor's duty to create an environment where this sort of, there's actually a term, whole or small community can survive and thrive on its own. That's all I'm going to say about it. I'm really excited to hear everybody else's impressions, though.
Yeah, thank you, Amon. One thing I've been thinking about is that could be our modern day life's wish, right? So you wish there's no social media, there's no commuting to work, there's no traffic jam, there's no war, no violence, and that's what we wish, if you are living in a busy modern world. And you can imagine during that time why Lao Tzu is talking about this kind of situation. And I like what Amon talking about. It's not isolation because you can hear the rooster and the dog barking from the neighbor. So you have kind of feeling of togetherness. And without visit each other, we can read as there's no need to do business, okay, no need to compete. That's another way to read it. If you want to read as a utopia, okay, that's another way to read it. But anyway, let's go to Nick, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just want to comment on Amon's reference to Republic. This strikes me as something very interesting with different people in different locations conceptualize utopia. And so I want to try a hypothesis on you guys to see if it makes sense. Geography conditions our vision of the ideal world. So in the expanded land area dominated by agriculture, where Lao Tzu lived, his ideal utopia, world will be the one described here. But if we think about the Greeks, which was a seafaring, trading nation, then the ideal utopian would be some, comfortable sized city-state. So even the extremists like Diogenes, who wanted to live in nature, would live on the street of the city rather than in the mountains of agricultural land. And so for the Greeks, to be banished outside the city was worse than being sentenced to death. So that strikes me as something really interesting, because the way people lived, the geography defined very much the way they think. And obviously, the more contemporary thinker like Heidegger, who wanted to live a simpler life as a peasant in the southwest, forest of Germany, is also draws a lot of the sufficiency of land that depends on agriculture rather than open sea trading economic relationship with other people. So just want to put that thought in there.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. But one thing I think you might want to think about is Confucius' ideal state would be totally different. You are even come from the same place, right? If you read the Great Unity or the Da Tong, okay, they talk about totally different thing. Talking about the family, talking about the old people, and somebody always has been taking care of the children, have the people taking care of, this kind of thing. So different people, different school always have a different idea. That's the Kwang, please.
Okay. So I would say that it's a chapter or stanza that is the most challenging for me, in the sense that it is very interesting. It is for sure that it is proposing a vision of life and of reality that I'm not particularly prone to. But I would like to say that it can be read on two levels. The first level is to propose something that is noble, in the sense that be centered on yourself rather than on the other. I think that it is absolutely awesome and brilliant. And I think that is the thread that is going through the Tao Te Ching, right? Of course, I express it in a Confucianist way, in the sense that if you read the Chongyong, the Chongyong would talk about the vertical reality of infinite awareness with the horizontal dimension of intellect. And that is precisely that horizontal dimension of the intellect that is talked about when the stanza is alluding to both the card, shield, blade, etc. Okay, the different tools that are created by the use of our intellect precisely. So I'm happy that Amon showed a copy of the Republic, because I think that the Republic is much closer to the Confucianist perspective, because if you read the Republic, it is an invitation to epistemological development, as in the case of the Tao Te Ching, of course. But I would say that in the case of the Tao Te Ching, I think that the Tao Te Ching truly invite everyone to the supreme epistemological development, with a difference with the Confucianist perspective or the Platonic perspective. The Tao Te Ching would say, go to the supreme state of epistemological development, but don't play too much with the toys that the intellect would be capable to create, because you will have more problems with those toys than happiness. In the case of Plato and of the Confucianist school, on the contrary, they say, well, you will have to go to the supreme of the epistemological development, but at the same time, create those toys and expand your nation, your empire, and so on. But try when you create those toys not to be completely mesmerized by them. Okay, that I think that is the big challenge that is not obvious because, of course, human history till now prove that we have been mesmerized by our toys. It doesn't mean that we cannot change. I think that we can change because the challenge of modern time is precisely how we can have the advantages of the mind, meaning art, science, and technology, and at the same time be centered on infinite awareness. I would like to end with a ironical note. the the happy villages that are described in stanza 80, I'm sorry to say that, they truly existed in ancient China, but they ended up to be absorbed in the bigger Chinese empire. I stop here.
Thank you, Kwang. That's true, though. But that's why they write this one, because I think we have Joe, right? Joe, you have a hands up. Joe.
Thanks. Is there any chance you could
Yeah.
put that translation back up? Your
Oh.
translation?
Oh, okay.
I had a question about.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
The second line, let people have many tools, but
Yeah.
they don't need to use them.
Yeah.
I can't understand the logic of that. Now, my translation says weapons, but this one says tools. But
Hold on, just 1 minute. Okay. They talk. Okay, so let me translate the line by line. Okay, they have the many 石帛之器. Okay, I think I don't know whose translation translated as 10 of hundreds machine. Okay, 器. Some people translate as a machine, but I think it sounds too modern, so I translate as tools. So this one is talking about 而不用 basics, never use them. So in other way, you have a smartphone, but you don't hook on that all day long. Okay, that's a way to interpret. So do you think that logically makes sense? You have something, but you don't use it. Then later on, you talk about you have a boat, you have a car, but you never use it. You have a weapon, but you don't display it. So that means you have something, but you don't use it. So why you have something? Because in case, I have emergency, I can use my cell phone to call, but I don't hook up on that all day long. I have a car, but I don't drive my car all over the place. I just let car sit there. I have a weapon. In case somebody break in, I can use, but I don't do it. I think that's the idea. I hope does that logically make sense to you?
you know what? I keep looking at a tool, and I'm assuming agrarian society, you would have to use your tools to help produce your food.
Oh, that's what you are talking about. Yeah, I think probably that would be. Do you have any suggestion what word I have to use? The T means equipment. I'm thinking of equipment or.
So I just dropped into the chat the etymology of qi, which literally is tool, utensil, device. But this idea of utensil or device, it's not like a simple tool. It's meant to be something slightly more complex, slightly more developed, a utensil or a device, something that has a refined purpose as opposed to multi-purposes because this stick is just handy to have. And I think that's why some people translate it as machine or something else, but it is meant to indicate something a little more technologically advanced than, say, a hammer.
Yeah.
If I may interrupt, I think that the stanza answer to that by itself, okay? When it's written that about the tools that do the work of tens or hundreds, okay? So it's not about the the simple solver or the simple hole that is the problem, but a machine that is capable to do the work of tens or hundreds. That's the problem for Lao Tzu.
Okay, so thank you, Kwang. So you interpret 识帛之器 not means you have many tools. You mean the tool can do many things. That's how you read it. Okay, great. That's another way to look at it. I hope
Sorry, if I could ask just one more question. Let people weigh deaths so they don't migrate to distant places. Could you maybe help me understand that line?
Okay, so that's the go back to the Chinese is 使民重死而不远离. Okay, I believe the way is Taoism idea don't want the people take risk. Okay, so for the merchant country, right, or seafarer country, or like American Great West, people take risk to expand their land, go somewhere because travel always dangerous. So let people wait death. So people will, in another way, is appreciate your own life. So you don't want to take risk to travel. Okay. So during that time, travel always involve risk in your life. So I think that's the meaning here.
Thank you.
Okay, so you satisfied with the answer? Okay, thank you for all kind of question. If you think it's not logically makes sense, please let me know. We have Mark and Yulia, please. Joe Barlow, you have a question, right? You have.
Yeah, no, I just put I put an exclamation point.
Yeah. I'm sorry because we have two Joes, so.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe, please.
No, I mean, there's a couple of things that had come to mind initially, actually, when I'd read this, is the idea of like kind of Tolkien's Middle Earth, where there's this element of simplicity and essentially this industrialization is kind of not in accordance with nature, and has a way of looking at kind of exuding its dominance over nature. So that's what initially had come to mind for me. As far as the size of a governing structure, the thing that I actually take from the Tao more than anything else is the idea of right measure and right proportion. And so that doesn't necessarily equate to size. And so what I mean by that is something that was interesting when in doing a little bit of reading about the founding of the United States, specifically the Federalist Papers. Number 10 is that they do speak to the fact that one of the concerns is that with a smaller country that you can easily gather a majority. And so I think that while this is not necessarily saying that, it's in the practical sense of how to kind of think about this in terms of right measure, is the idea that a majority can be a mob, if you will, can be rallied very easily in a smaller in a smaller state, if you will. And I just think about it from those terms is that it's more about a loss of values and the inability for people to get along than it is about the size of the state itself. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that that's where it's talking more about harmony. And so that the size of the state is kind of, just, not as maybe as relevant as to me, as is the message of not living in excess, not needing more, and not needing to dominate, I would say specifically. And so all of these kinds of things are, I think, and I think that these are underpinning the Tao in this as opposed to looking at it from a political perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Then we go to Mark, Yulia, and Kevin, and Penny. Okay, Mark, please.
Thanks. I just wanted to comment on the relationship between Plato and Confucius and Lao Tzu. And especially since Aman brought up the Republic, I think that the size and length of the Republic is a function of Glaucon and Adeimantus demanding the luxury that was missing from the first city which Socrates established. And they called that a city of pigs, but that was a city that was much simpler, which was self-sufficient and much smaller. So that would be in book 2. And that, I think, is something that is much closer to the ideal here. When we want to look beyond the horizons of the Tao, then there was a need to develop a whole superstructure for Plato. When they were wanted to look beyond the needs, I think this is something that Pai Ji had been emphasizing a while back. Just think about your needs and don't go so far beyond what your needs are. And Plato's, and in terms of what Kwon was saying about the relationship to Confucianism, I think you can find that in the Republic too, in book 7, when Socrates says that in those virtues that have to do with acting and how we act, it's really habit that is the principal thing that is going to help us form the virtue. And I always have thought that that emphasis on habit or even ritual, depending on what you want to call it, connects Plato very closely to Confucius. My question about your translation is also about the line which was just asked about, and that is about death. And it was not Joe B, but the previous Joe, I believe, who asked about it. And one of the things I find interesting about your translation, and I'm looking at the Boston University series of 8 translations: Wu, Lau, Chan, Hendricks, Whaley, Lin, Cleary, and Feng in English. About half of them in this line about death connect the two thoughts through a logical connection, which you do. You say, let people weigh death so they don't migrate. In other words, pointing out the logical relation between the two parts of the sentence. And some of these translations do that, and some do not. They just use the connective and, rather than some sort of connective suggesting implication. So I thought you could justify that.
Yes, because that's the Chinese word, okay. I highlight this word. This is a very strange word, okay. If you want to translate in English, it could be and, could be so, could be but, okay. So that's really depend on how you want to read it. And I do see the logical connection, because travel is danger. So you don't want people travel. You want to make sure people appreciate your life. Okay, so you don't travel. That's the point. So, okay, that's the reason. So on the previous one, talking about many tool, but they don't use, I use but, right? But the words, Chinese words are the same. Okay, the same word. Okay, but I probably cannot be consistent because this word is, they use the same word for different situation. That's the challenge I am facing. So
I just want to echo what Jason said. Is a very challenging word on its own in Chinese and demands context because it can be used conjunctively, disjunctively, or as logical extension. So therefore, and it really depends on context, and it really depends on the reader to decide on the interpretation. I agree with Jason making the logical connection between these because, as I said, migration and death were intimately linked in this time period, that you would do this only if you weighed your chances of survival here less than your. It's very similar to actually migration across the world in current terms.
Today, yes. And the word migrant doesn't capture necessarily the flavor of refugee, fleeing somewhere where you know you won't survive.
Okay, put this way, I probably not translated the word right. The Chinese word is 远徙, 远. Okay, that means travel far. Okay, so during that time, if you say travel far, it probably, I believe, doesn't mean leisure travel. It probably means necessary travel. Okay, you have some problem. That's why you have to travel far. Okay, that's my assumption. So, migrate probably to neutral, to migrate to distant place. I do translate, but probably doesn't, in English, it doesn't sound a necessary or desperate travel. But in Chinese, I believe it sounds a desperate travel. Okay, let's put it this way. Okay, or you want to pursue higher profit. Okay, so, but I'm not sure during that time the merchant, okay, is developed well or not. So that's open to discuss. But one thing I appreciate, Mark, you talking about compare with Plato's Republic. So this one is the city of pig. That's true. And then that also explains why this Tao Te Ching is so short. Because if you are happy with the city of pig and see the value of living in the city of pig, then you don't have to write books 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 10. You just stop at book 2 and say, okay, we are happy to live in the city of pig. Then we done. So, so next would be Yulia and Kevin and Penny. Okay, Yulia, please.
This is just a tiny addition to a few points back when Quan was reading the tools part as tools that can do the work of many people. Right, you would not need that if you don't have many people. Right, if you have such a small state, you wouldn't need to farm a lot of food because you just don't have as many people to feed, for instance. That's how I read it.
Thank you, Yuri. But okay, here I'd like to make a little bit comment here. The Chinese word open with 4 words: small state, few people. 4 words, okay. And Derek Lin translate right, just what word, right? 小国寡民. So here's no tone, okay. When Professor Roberts translate, he said that keep the kingdom small, right? So you add keep the kingdom. I translate as in a small state with few people. I put an assumption for the case of small one. So we don't know, okay? In Professor Roberts' translation, say, I prefer a small state and few people. In my translation is in the situation of a small state and small city in this way. So open to your interpretation, but the origin just give you 4 words. Okay, small state, few people. That's it. Okay, that's open for you to interpret. Kevin, please.
Yes. Thank you, Jason. Amon. I try use 2 different way try interpret this one. One side from physical world, small state, less people, and if we back to the natural world, we don't need tools. Look smart the other wildlife they live. And also in the ancient world, it is, if you go far without that time and money, neighbor, this could be hard to live. Even modern days, just now someone mentioned refugee. How about immigration? If you, for example, some new immigration going to America, you need American experience, education. So it's hard. The second one is about you have the boat, carriage, and similar tools. You don't use it. So it's another word I would self-efficient. In Chinese called 自给自足. You serve yourself. It's not use the tools. It's the second one is the weapon. If the country you have weapon, don't use it, don't display, underline. That's the peace. And the basic nature state about for tile knot, it's still same thing. You don't need calculator, computer, iPhone. So you could live that one day. Enjoy the food, relax your mind, relaxation. And the last one, eventually today, actually, it sounds like a conflict. In the neighbor country or village, you can hear chicken and dog sound. But now the last 2, from birth to death, you don't communicate each other. Why? Because you got it self-efficient. You don't need to bother others. You live with peace. So if from another world, spiritual world, focus on your internal mind rather external desire and ambitious. And anything else I see. That's it. I'm going to pause here. I would hear you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We have Penny, please.
Yeah, I just had some thoughts when they were talking about the small city and the city of pigs and size, because I was thinking, if you're in a small city where people know each other, so you're not going to encounter people that you don't know, I think there's a type of internal governance that doesn't exist when you're in a big city where you run into people all the time that you're never going to see again. Because if all the people basically you see are people that you're going to see tomorrow and the next day and the next day, you might think more before you act, even if you're angry at them, for example, because you're going to see them again and again and again. So, maybe you don't need like all the books of the Republic if there's this governance, because it's a small group of people that know each other. And it reminded me, like you said, there were some groups that live like that in China, because I had seen a documentary about some Amazon tribes, and they very much lived like that. They were very simple people, had very simple lives, and, had very few things, but they were very happy and didn't work that much because they didn't want to have too many things. So they spent a lot of time just being with their family and their friends and talking. But where they had come with the documentary actually was because energy companies were coming in
Yeah.
and destroying their environment, you know, and so they wanted, you know, to publicize to the world, you know, who they were and why they had rights. And so, you know, they were letting the camera crews come in and stuff like that and actually show their lifestyle. But I would think that was kind of like the ideal life from the view of Tao. And one last quick point was just about the tools too. If you have tools that can make lots of stuff, then instead of having a simple life where you only have the necessary things, I mean, you're going to have piles of stuff because these tools are going to produce piles of shoes and clothing and plates and all kinds of stuff. And then you're going to start having, you know, a lot of stuff like Americans do, and a lot of people in the world now. So I think maybe too, it wasn't just because, you know, of the tool per se, but what the tool produces. Because all at once, you're getting far more than you need.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Penny. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the small state, I think about Plato's another book, The Laws. He specifically talk about 5,040, I think 5,040 people, 5,040 family. Okay, so that's a small state. Joe, please. The other Joe.
You know, just basically, I wanted to maybe just bring up the obvious that maybe hadn't been stated. The idea of Wu Wei of non-action, you know, kind of having these tools and not using them. And I think that is, you know, directly related to the idea of, you know, of being in a state of kind of flow, living, you know, so, and I also think what Penny just brought up was actually very important, the element of simplicity. And how simplicity actually allows you to do what is enough and nothing more. So I think both of those, I mean, those are, you know, just kind of low-hanging fruit examples that are obviously in the text that I just didn't hear mentioned. That's all, but I bring them up.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Mark, please.
I wanted to echo what was said about simplicity. And, you know, in my own mind, I always thought of Taoism as involving pacifism, simplicity, and relativism or relativity in some way. I know we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about pacifism, and I think both Quan and Aman had expressed the idea that yes, you can find it in there, but it's not always going to be a pacifism at all costs. And so, but this is one of the places in which it has a sort of pacifist overtones. And the simplicity has already been mentioned. And the relativity, I think, can be seen in the idea that the two little communities are looking at, they're near each other, and they both have dogs and cocks crowing. So they both know that they're living the same kind of life. There's the kind of relativity that I see there. And my question is about the translation of that. I forgot to mention this before. You use the words look over. And in English, look over has a certain idiomatic meaning. Like it means look closely, because you look over your contract, you look over the menu. If you want to say they overlook each other, you turn the words around, then you say like, okay, you can kind of see one from there. I can see it in the distance. They can see me, but look over might be too specific.
Okay, thank you for bringing up And I think look over is right. I mean, right means match with Chinese word 相望. 相望 means you look at each other, which they have the implication of watch each other. Okay, see you are safe or not safe, this kind of situation. So we would like to say the neighbor should help each other and 相望, okay, look over each other. So that's when you on vacation, you want your neighbor to 相望, which is watch your house. So
Yeah, if you want to be very literal with those words, it would be mutual look towards.
Yeah,
so
that's
Right.
important. I think that's important because if you read, let's say, Wu translation, it's within sight of each other with no implication that you're watching over as well. And in Lao, you just have within sight of one another. It's very neutral. But
Yeah.
there's this ethical component.
Yeah, I think they have an ethical component on that. So here it means, you see, I think the implication is probably more profound than most of the translation, because they are not talking about pure city of pig. They talk about you have something, but you still try to live as a pity of the city of pig, right? So you have the tools, you have a weapon, you have the Teslas, okay, but you just don't use it, okay, because no need to use. I have a cellular phone, but I don't use all the time. So that's it. I think that's so with the neighbor, we can watch each other, but we don't doing business to each other. Let's put it this way. So, okay. JP, please.
I only want to add one comment in reference to the neighborliness of staying away from somebody. Dogs and roosters both crow when somebody's approaching. They're kind of warning devices. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I think the text probably means the distance. I believe that means the distance is close. So when the dog bark, you still can hear. That means not very far away. So, but anyway, thank you, everyone. Have a lot of comment, and then let's move on to the last chapter. Okay. Okay, so I forget. Okay. And please raise your hand if you want to read the translation. We have Joe Barlock first and whoever. Okay, Joe, please.
So I will read the Jia Fufang one as well. Truthful words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not truthful. Good men do not argue. Those who argue are not good. Those who know are not learned. The learned do not know. The sage never tries to store things up. The more he does for others, the more he has. The more he gives to others, the greater his abundance. The Tao of heaven is pointed, but does no harm. The Tao of the sage is work without effort.
Thank you, Joe. We have Penny and Kwang.
Okay, I'm going to read Stephen Mitchell. True words aren't eloquent. Eloquent words aren't true. Wise men don't need to prove their point. Men who need to prove their point aren't wise. The master has no possessions. The more he does for others, the happier he is. The more he gives to others, the wealthier he is. The Tao nourishes by not forcing. By not dominating, the master leads. Oh, was I on mute?
No. Yeah, you are on mute. So we heard you. So great. Thank you.
Okay.
Kwang, please.
Okay, stanza 81, translation by Professor Mose Roberts. Words to trust and not refine. Words refine and not to trust. Good men are not gifted speakers. Gifted speakers are not good. Experts are not widely learned. The widely learned, not expert. Wise rulers for themselves keep not, yet gain by having done for all, have more for having freely shared. Do good, not harm, is heaven's way. The wise act for and not against.
Thank you, Kwang. No, okay, so
All right. Let's tie a bow around this. Chapter 81, not hoarding. Trustworthy words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not trustworthy. Good people are not necessarily eloquent. Eloquent people are not necessarily good. The wise are not erudite. The erudite are not wise. The sage does not hoard. The more he works for others, the more he possesses. The more he gives to others, the more he earns. The Tao of heaven is to benefit, not to harm. The Tao of the sage is to act for others, not to vie with them.
thank you, Amam. This one is very simple, and then, but I do want to talk about is okay, basically it's the three part, I believe. The first part talking about the everybody's behavior. The trustworthy words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not trustworthy. Good people are not eloquent. Eloquent people are not good. So that's the first part about how to behave. Okay. Second part talk about the sage not holding. Right. So I think Penny already talked about the previous chapter. You have a surplus. You accumulate a lot. So you don't hold it, because you want to give. The more you give, the more you have. So that's one thing. Another one, the last one, talking about the Tao of heaven and the Tao of sage, basics, benefit but not harm. How to do it? Okay, is to act but not to vie. Okay, not compete, not vying with others. You just act, but not 为而不争. You do something, but not to vie, to compete with other people. So that's the three part on this one. And I'd like to mention is the first part. I've been thinking about why this one pick up this, this talking about not holding, right? We'll talk about holding. Working for others doesn't hold, right? 圣人不积. But how does this three related to holding? Look at this way. Trustworthy are not beautiful. Beautiful in the Chinese word called 美. Okay, I want to translate, almost want to translate to ethical or moral, because I believe the entire Tao Te Ching, the words 美 doesn't mean beautiful, or means behavior beautiful, which is moral. Okay, so here is talking about the trustworthy is not just holding a lot of moral teaching, okay, and then or a lot of beautiful words, okay. A lot of beautiful words doesn't imply, okay, or entail trustworthy. So you don't hold a lot of beautiful words or hold a lot of morality on that. Second, good people are not eloquent. Chinese word called 辩, okay. We translate as eloquent, but another way to translate is reasoning, okay. So you don't accumulate a lot of reason to be good, okay. So good doesn't mean accumulate a lot of reason. Third one, the wise are not erudite. Chinese was called 博. It means you read a lot of knowledge, you absorb a lot of knowledge. So you don't be wise, you don't accumulate knowledge. So it's matched with the overall teaching of this one. You don't accumulate all the morality. Okay, you don't accumulate all the reasons. You don't accumulate all the knowledge. Okay, to be trustworthy, to be a good person, to be a wise person is not the way to do it by accumulating. Okay, so I think that's the that's why these three lines are associated with holding. That's what I get from this one. Yeah. So I'll stop here and Amma, please.
Sorry, I had two things happen all at once. And I have a confession. I think only Madeline is aware. I'm a smoker. I smoke cigarettes. I try to make sure I've never done it on camera. And why? It's because I'm hoarding my reputation. Trustworthy words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not trustworthy. Good people are not necessarily eloquent. All of this, all of that first section is about the hoarding of the image one produces, the image one gives. And the advice is that people who are so covetous of their image are going to be people to not be taken in by. People who are a little more laissez-faire about it, you might want to give them a fair airing because maybe they have something of value to say. I know this intellectually. I know this from my schooling, but I still can't bring myself to have the camera on if I'm going to be smoking while I'm meeting with people. Why? It feels like it undermines something. I'm not sure why. I just have this impression that I've probably taken in for years that a person who claims to be a follower of the Tao but still smokes obviously is not qualified to speak at all about harmony with nature. That could be some people's opinion. It could not be. And until right now, probably nobody was privy to this internal warring that I have. The sage doesn't hoard. Well, confession time again. I'm not a sage, apparently, because I am interested in having my words carry weight. I do want to be taken as serious about what I do, and I don't want to undermine that. So I'm not a sage. Forgive me. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes out of The Count of Monte Cristo. I'm a priest, not a saint. I'm a priest, not a sage. I beg your all forgiveness. But I do believe in the idea giving is how you earn. You're not going to get more by scrambling to get more. I've never been able to stomach the rat race, but I do love to give. I am a professor for a reason, because I love to pass the buck. That is the name of the job. And that is the most rewarding experience I can think of, paycheck or no. But never tell my bosses that, because I do need to eat. The way of heaven is to benefit and not to harm. But we just talked about the Odyssey last week and the problem of evil. And aren't there 8.1 earthquakes in the world that kill dozens, hundreds, thousands of people at a wash? Yeah, but that's not the way of heaven. The earth shakes. It's just what is done. The same earthquake in Japan that has actually embraced many of these lessons in their architecture killed maybe 7 people, that in Turkey killed scores of people. The harm isn't from the actions of heaven. Heaven just does what it does. And it may have a benefit in mind, but it's people and their reluctance to go with the benefits of nature, to accept that, yeah, a big one's coming and you should probably build disposable houses so you can rebuild easily and just get out of the way of the tsunami, as opposed to put up structures to stand the test of time until the Tao of Heaven tests that and you were found to not be equal to, and you never will be. So what does the sage do? The sage acts for others, but doesn't vie with them. I'm not going to Turkey to give architectural advice. They're going to do what they're going to do. I could also use Morocco as an example. But I can quietly, gently point people and say, maybe you should think of it this way. Maybe you should consider this, so that perhaps they find their own way into flow with the Tao of Heaven, with the Tao. These are my confessions. These are what this chapter really elicits out of me, which is be forthcoming, be your most honest self as often as humanly possible, with one exception. Any company that says we want you to bring your full self to work is lying to you. You should not trust them to be good on their word, because eloquent people are not necessarily good. And beautiful words are not necessarily trustworthy. So, button it up at work, at least until you have job security. Then let it hang out just a little bit more. Don't be taken in. Choose to give over getting. And don't assume because something seems disastrous and evil and that the heavens are working against you, that it's the heavens' fault. It could be your own reluctance to just accept and adapt.
Thank you, Amam. So we have Joe, please.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the discussion around whether or not kind of having to win an argument, it's kind of and that's kind of where one is seeking truth and the other one is seeking to win the argument, and from the kind of a Socratic perspective. And so I think that in seeking truth, it's clearly, there is sincerity that exists within it. Whereas if you're seeking to win, you're just seeking to dominate, which is actually the root of a lot of problems that exist within society. So now there's also the idea of that there's and Jason, you mentioned it in your translation, that there is something that is beneficial and that doesn't harm, and that there's something inherently beneficial in our act, that there is a good that can be pursued. There's something that is always beneficial. So that comes to the idea of de and virtue.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that what it can be pursued, which is actually an important part of this verse. And also the idea of not knowing, not always knowing, not having a complete understanding of ourselves, that it's a continuous search for the truth. So this element of self-understanding exists with, again, this is kind of very Socratic. The more I know, the more I know that I don't know. So the less I know about myself, the more I know about myself, the more I realize I don't know anything about the world. With that comes a certain degree of humility. And I'll just echo Aman's comments as well regarding the idea of whenever you're pursuing something for yourself, it tends not to be satisfactory. And it kind of goes in contrast to what we just talked about in 80, where there is a level of contentment that people have, whereas this constant need to consume for oneself as opposed to working with others kind of works against harmony. So that there's no there's a lot, well, you could say there's a lack of virtue in that. So anyway, that's just some of the ideas that kind of stick out to me on this particular passage.
Thank you, Joe. Kevin, please.
Yes, thank you. This we read the Tao Te Ching 2 times. First time is Tao Te Ching. This time we call it De Tao Jing from 38 to 81. I try to think about after 81, we should be back to chapter 1 from Tao. I see the pattern is very similar. The Xing Ye, the trusty words not beautiful. Beautiful words not trusty. 4 words for each 2 sections. Oh, just play around. And also I use the same pattern, for joke. Tasty food, not necessary house. Healthy food, not necessary healthy. So that's for fun. And try, if this last one, 2. It's the Tao of heaven. The Tao is come up. Heaven to benefit, not to harm. The Tao of sage is to act, not to vie. So the question would be, what is Tao? Let's come to chapter 1. I would say very logical if we do this. I would hear you guys thought about this, how we structure originally, how we do Tao Te Ching is better for ourselves, audience, or another way, De Dao Jing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We have to read Confucius Analect to finish it. Then we go back to Tao. So,
so which way is better, you think, for yourself, Amon? You think this?
I think both are actually valuable because you'll read it 1 through 81 because that's the linear mindset, but to break it up and read it this way, De before Dao, it just provides different insights. I don't think one's superior, but a variety provides a spice for life.
Personally, I would like to leave the chapter 1 as the last one to read. Okay, same as a lot of book or philosophical writing. The preface, introduction, sometimes you read it at the beginning, you feel like you don't know what they are talking about. So after you finish everything, they go back to read the introduction. It's much more meaningful. At least that's my opinion. So if I could, I would like to preserve or leave the first chapter as the last one to read, because and only the person who read all others should read the first one. That's my personal.
Leave more confusion after for the first chapter.
Yeah, so
thank you.
So we will make a check on who attend, and they only attend enough session can join the chapter 1 reading. So that will be the okay, Paul, please.
Yeah. Would you mind putting the translation up once more, Jason? And while you're doing that, I want to say, I think Aman is off the hook. And the reason I think it is relevant to my question, which is I never once heard Aman say in all these meetups, by the way, guys, I am a sage. I'm one of the originals. And, I am pure. And I'm just telling you from that, I never heard you say that once. So there you go. You're off the hook. You could have all kinds of sins. But I also want to say, sort of relative to this, I want to ask Jason, why is necessarily in parens only in the second line of the first triplet? Because Aman, for instance, could say a lot of erudite things or trustworthy things, and they might also be beautiful. So why is it only necessarily on the second one?
I'm sorry, I don't remember. Probably I should take it out. Aman, do you remember?
I remember that we discussed this. I think that it steers us away from the absolutist view that you should absolutely never trust someone who's eloquent, or you should absolutely never assume that because somebody's ineloquent, they are good. I like the disclaimer in parentheses there. It's not in the text. And so you will have to allow for some interpretation here, but it is in keeping with the manner in which the translation we have done has flowed so far, to re-emphasize that point, that it's never absolute, that it's always able to give ground for the possibility. Same reason that we chose to translate, or Jason chose to translate Chang as usual, as opposed to always. I do think that it's a valuable addition to this last section, because it breaks the sort of the cognitive ossification that happens reading this as some sort of dictum, as opposed to just be wary and don't be taken in, which really is kind of the tone that Lao Tzu is putting in this. Just be wary, don't be taken in by this.
Yeah, thank you, Aman.
Thank you.
Or you have other question, or you have a further?
No, I'm hearing how you thought through it, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you to bring up. Suzanne, please.
Yeah, the use of eloquent also, according to Confucius thought, it's that the verbal expression of eloquence is more of a rhetoric, so it could be deceptive and not ethically stance. But I guess like when I first read it, I was thinking of the Western culture, and so I interpreted as I guess I didn't interpret it in that sense in the when I first read eloquent.
So you mean you will use different word, or you will?
No, I think they're culturally different in terms of the American view of eloquent, and then also the Confucius thinking of eloquent.
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking about rewarding on this few thing, because in 辩 this word, argumentative could be the right way, but it doesn't. But I think it's reason. Okay, I start to think about here. It means reason. Okay, so but anyway, I will leave it for the later thing. Thank you anyway. Kwang, please.
I would like to read again the last line of Professor Moss Roberts' translation. And the last line is the wise act for and not against. And I would say that this last stanza is very interesting. And I don't see, for example, good men are not gifted speakers, and gifted speakers are not good. I don't see that as perfect, as absolute opposition. Okay, because once again, I always come back to the vertical reality of infinite awareness and the horizontal dimension of the intellect. Someone can have the vertical reality and the horizontal intellect too. And someone can have the horizontal intellect without the horizontal reality. And a third person can have the vertical reality without the horizontal intellect. So there are at least those three combinations, okay? And so it goes back once again to the fact that, yes, it has been already said, but I want to repeat that. A gifted speaker can be good, and a gifted speaker can be bad, and a gifted speaker can be in between. So, and here, that stanza for me is the perfect conciliation of Taoism and Confucianism, because Confucianism also promotes infinite awareness, but beside promoting infinite awareness, Confucianism put as a kind of obligation, and I use the word obligation on purpose, that infinite awareness has to be translated into social reality, into national realities, into family realities. So maybe that the lesson of Confucianism that is you need to cultivate more that dimension of infinite awareness so that the horizontal dimension of the intellectual productions would be of higher quality. And I would like to quote from memory the first three lines of the Zhongyong, okay, the doctrine of the mean, that I prefer to translate as living center on infinite awareness. And those lines are, if I remember, that which is ordained by heaven is our nature. To lead by our nature is called the Tao. And to cultivate the Tao is the teaching. And that is a Confucianist book, let's not forget. But I would say that what I just said is the perfect equivalent of what we just read in stanza 81. That's why I say the stanza 81 is a perfect conciliation of Taoism and Confucianism. Because in Confucianism, it has been perfectly acknowledged that what is ordained by heaven is our nature, okay? The famous constant norm, that infinite and absolute and universal awareness. So, and that's why do good and not harm is heaven's way, and the wise act for and not against, in the sense that the wise will act because he will be for something. It can be for him, for his family, for his nation, for his neighbor. It's not important, but he acts for and not against. And sometimes we can act against ourselves, okay? So the sage is certainly characterized by the fact that at least he is not acting against himself. It's a minimum. I stop here.
So, Kwang, I'd like to go back. You read the last line for your translation. So,
Yes.
Professor Robert translate 圣人 as wise man.
Yes, he simply say the wise act for and not against.
Okay, and then how does he translate the 知者不博? He also translate as wise.
No. Yes, wise too. Yes.
Yeah, so that's the part I kind of disagree because
sorry. 知者不博 is experts are not widely learned.
Expert, he translates as
are not widely learned. So here, I'm happy that you make that comment, because it's so perfect in my opinion, okay? Because once again, is the dance, and because for me, it's not opposition, it's a complementary dance. Experts mean the one who have a lot of information, of knowledge, okay? So that's the horizontal dimension of the intellect. So experts are not widely learned. So widely learned for me is the infinite awareness. And the widely learned, not expert, okay? Meaning that those are the two dimensions that have to be put together, okay? You know the expression, Jason, of Ta Yi Tong, okay? The great unity. The great unity can be interpreted politically, meaning a society where you have justice and power together. But Tai Yi Tong can also be interpreted epistemologically, meaning that it's the great unity of the vertical reality of infinite awareness and the horizontal dimension of the intellect. Once again, a gifted speaker can be good, and a gifted speaker can be bad, or a gifted speaker can be not so good and not so bad. Okay, I see at least those three possibilities. There are probably more if we want to be more subtle and more refined. But the vertical reality of infinite awareness is not in opposition, it's in dialectical dance with the horizontal dimension of intellect. I think that's why I love so much the last stanza, which is the perfect conclusion. Okay, we have those two realities in us, the vertical reality of the infinite awareness, and because we have a body with a specific brain, we also have the horizontal dimension of the intellect capable to produce different toys or tools. I stop here.
Okay, thank you, Kwam. Before I go to Mark, I saw Suzanne put a comment on the chat about the Confucianism, Confucius analytic about the adequate. So I just want to make it, I translate in the same word, adequate, but in Confucius analytic, they use ning, okay, that's another word, okay, which has a negative comment. And here, the Chinese word is 变. It's more neutral, okay? So if you care, I just want to make, that's the two words a little bit different. That's why I tend to see this one, instead of translate adequate, I kind of think about probably it means reasoning, too many reasons, holding a lot of reason. Okay, so that's just my thought. Anyway.
I wanted to defend eloquence because I understand, yeah, it does more literally mean argument or debate, but I think it's that justification through rhetorical means that does kind of capture this idea that in just the word eloquent really does get across the cautionary tale here, that a person who is taken in by eloquent or fancy or enticing words, those don't make those words true. Just because they hit you in the feels doesn't mean you should just assume, oh, that person knows what they're talking about. That person may just know how to play on your emotions.
Okay, thank you. So we have Mark and Joe. Mark.
Thanks. It's really such an honor to read this together with everybody, and to let me turn my light on here. So I'm in a complete darkness, and we've only read from approximately chapter 36 or 37. I know that, but. And, Quan was quoting from the Doctrine of the Mean. He quoted the opening, what heaven has conferred is called nature. An accordance with this is called the Tao, and the regulation of this path is instruction.
Mhm.
But the next line says the path may not be left for an instant. If it could be left, it would not be the path. And this I'm only saying in regards to you beginning your study of the Tao with the De, because you haven't left the path, but you've started it at a different spot. It's still the same path. All right. And in terms of chapter 81, what really struck me was at the end, when we have the Tao of heaven and the Tao of the sage. This got me thinking that way, as the Tao is to the universe, so the sage is to the society. So that the sage may be like a microcosm of the Tao. And maybe there's evidence for this, because here we're told in 81 that the sage lives for others, the sage gives, the sage is to benefit, and of course heaven is to benefit. And we can compare this possibly with chapter 51. The Tao gives life. The Tao gives life. It nurtures them, fosters them, shelters them, and De as well, virtue. But to give life, but to claim nothing. To do your work, but to set no store by it. So in a sense, the same characteristics that are said about the Tao in chapter 51 are said about the sage in 81.
Right, thank you, Mark. I think a couple of weeks ago, we have a session talk about sage, right? So anyway, Joe, please.
Yeah, I just want to speak to this idea of eloquence as well. I mean, I think, and I'm going to have a very Western kind of perspective. And I think that there's this idea of complexity, where something can be stated simply. There's the saying that by Pascal is that I wrote you this long letter because I could not write you a short one. And that meaning that the element of simplicity, the ability to say something simply and capture the complexity of it, there's a beauty in that. And I think the Tao actually speaks to that to a certain degree. But I think that there's this other aspect of it. There's something that's complicated. And where if it's complicated, it's cluttered. It's actually it's a lot of words that could be together that it may appear as, kind of convincing, but in reality, it's kind of it's full of contradictions, and it's actually just confusing. So I think there is this idea of eloquence from a Western perspective that that there is a beauty in eloquence, and there's also, I think, a certain degree of honesty and integrity to eloquence as well. So it's not necessarily that the two are in opposition of one another, where somebody that's eloquent is often kind of just trying to convince you of their position. And I think that ultimately what this really comes down to more than anything is the intent. within the discussion. And that's, I think the Tao is actually capturing that as well, is that, it's just, what is the intention of the individual, not necessarily, and it's saying within that, if, just be wary of, someone that may come off as eloquent, but their intentions are not virtuous. And so I think and so it kind of it works in harmony with the other part of the passage, essentially, that talks about duh. So I think that that's probably a better way of kind of looking at this idea of eloquence, versus, kind of maybe just looking at it from the words themselves.
Mhm. Thank you, Joe. Huang, please.
Yes, just to come back very fast to the Chinese word, the pian, because in pian, it's clear that it's about argumentation, okay? There is a touch of sophistry and of heuristic, if you allow me to use a fancy word. Heuristic in Greek philosophy is the kind of eloquence that you use to win at all costs, even against the truth. So that is the meaning of the Chinese pian. And in the Chinese word and Chinese philosophy, as Joe just said, there is also the opposition between Zhengyan, meaning the right word, the right eloquence, and Pian, which is heuristic. And here, because the word Pian or the character Pian has been used, it is clear that it's not about Zhengyan, but it's about heuristic, or the back kind of eloquence, or sophistic eloquence. And for the rest, I agree with Joe. The classical ideal of eloquence, precisely, is to express things in a simple manner, but with the maximum of meaning, of course. Same ideal in the Chinese word.
Okay, thank you, Kwang. I have a little bit about this word bian. Is this bian also used for demarcation, separate? Okay, in the ancient Chinese, if you so that's why I have been struggle with the translation. I'm never 100% happy with the adequate or argumentative, because I kind of doubted this one could be used as demarcation or critique. Okay, this kind of meaning on that. But that's another question, So probably only my own problem. So.
Jason, I suggest you use a fancy word, heuristic.
Okay, so make sure you use the word nobody understands, then no question on that. So, but again, I'm translating Taoism. I should use very simple word, and then if you read I believe the people here, if you read the Chinese, the word Tao Te Ching use is everyday word. They don't use the complex word everyday. That's like very common words used 2,500 ago and also use it today. So that's the beauty on that. So that's why prevent me to use some fancy word on that. But anyway, so Amam, please.
I didn't want to jump the line, but I know this conversation is going to run well past my bedtime. And I want to thank everybody. Your feedback is absolutely invaluable to this process. I wanted to jump back just for a moment to chapter 80 and then discuss chapter 81 very briefly. Back to chapter 80 about this idea of what is Lao Tzu driving at. And I have 3 words, which I think most of us probably have a visceral reaction to. Home-cooked meal. When you hear that, there's nobody who says, oh, I don't want that. I can't think of a person in the world who would turn their nose up at the notion of a good home cooked meal. We all have some implicit desire for that. And that's not something you go abroad to get. It's not something that's made in a Michelin star restaurant. It's something that evokes your very first sense of safety, security, home, the things that you would want to have. The second thing I wanted to bring up was about this idea of the sage as Tao in action. I think there's some truth to that. I also think it's a very, very rough ideal for anyone to actually achieve. And in fact, I think the goal, the reason for it being put out there as a goalpost is that it's not to be achieved. It's to be worked towards. This is something that comes up again and again and again in the Tao Te Ching, these impossible directions or impossible ideals to strive towards. Because if you're always going to strive towards them, you're never going to settle yourself with saying, oh, I've achieved sagehood, I'm good. No, there's always a little bit more that you can do. And that sort of insistent energy, as opposed to spits and starts, that's the sort of energy that Lao Tzu is coaching the leader, the follower, the practitioner who's going to take these lessons into action to have. You need to persist. You can't just be all excited about it right up front. You need to have a maintainable amount of enduring energy towards whatever endeavor it is you're going to be striving towards. And you're going to hit, pitfalls, roadblocks, setbacks. You just have to flow with it. You just have to accept it. You have to move around it, and you have to say consistently, persistently on target, like the river working towards the sea. The big rock in its way doesn't stop it. It just may make it take a little more circuitous route.
Brian,
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Brian, go ahead. You're muted.
Okay, this is a question really, if you will, for everyone, but especially for Aman, because I know he's been a professor. He may have answered it, certainly has touched on it in his last comment. We've talked a lot about communication, the nature of different ways of communicating. My question is about repetition and revisiting. So communicating time and time again. As a professor, you probably communicate these ideas once to each student. And then over years, you've repeated it a lot for yourself. And I personally find that without repetition, the communication is lost. I'm wondering want to ask Aman, what do you think about that?
Repetition is the mother of good advertising. I've said it 1,000 times in a classroom. And advertising is to make an idea stick with you. And I agree. You cannot just say a thing once and assume that it has been understood or it has been sort of internalized. The entire Tao Te Ching is a reiteration of a reiteration of a reiteration of a reiteration. It takes many different sort of slants at driving home many of the exact same points. And I think one of the most important is to have an appreciation for a little used English word, enough. What's enough? Can you do enough? Do you have enough? Are you doing enough? Is the effort you're making enough? Is it too much? Enough is that sort of measure. I think Joe was talking about that sort of medium metric that Taoists espouse as the greatest virtue you could probably wrap your hands around, wrap your mind around. Because if you can really get a good measure of it, it'll sustain you through your whole life. If you overdo, it's as bad as underdoing. If I just say the same thing, exactly the same, too many times in a classroom, it becomes repetition that just turns into white noise. But yeah, I agree. Communication is a vital key to teaching. And you don't know what method or form that communication is going to land until you see it as something actually does. And so you just throw a lot of stuff at the wall, which is antithetical to the idea of enough. But it's enough once the person's light bulb goes on over their head. Then I don't have to say it again. Does that sound about your experience as well?
Well, I don't know what my students have done with what I taught. I don't know. I wish I knew better.
Yeah.
But my own experience now with this Tao and the others, I know that repetition is very useful for me. I don't think I could get along without it.
I agree. I also do have to run all. I thank you all. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you next week for our review. Make sure everybody checks the syllabus.
Yeah, I think the purpose is we quickly read, every chapter, so we will not feel like, chapter 38 is far away from us. So I think that's the idea. So
yeah, everybody pick a favorite that you really want to read, and that one can be yours.
Yeah, then that would be your chapter. Then you have your own say on that. So okay, okay. So thank you, Amang, and
Mamanzo.
Okay, see you next week. And Mark, please.
I just wanted to respond to Greatheart, I think it's Brian, that yes, the repetition is important for learning. And I think somewhere Confucius said, I don't know where this is, I'd love to know, to learn and at times to repeat what one has learned. Is that not a pleasure? I've always thought
that's the book 1, chapter 1.
Oh, Analects?
Analect, yes, but I have a different interpretation. I don't see that's a repetition, but that's a different thing.
Okay, well, that my point was to ask about the nature of repetition, because if you think about it from maybe a Deleuzian point of view, is there ever really repetition, or are you always in a different context and a different mindset, and each time, it's let's say the return of something that is different in a unique way? So we're never really repeating.
I'm never teaching. Well, I never been a professor, so I will let you answer this. But again, I probably need to go. But I'd like to, since you talk about the first, that when we talk about Analect, I talk about Analect, because that one commonly being interpreted as you learn, but you practice repeatedly, and what appraisal. I think that's the wrong interpretation, but most of translate in this way. So
all I can say is I've had pleasure repeating that over.
But what Confucius said is, 学而时习之, you learn, but you have opportunity to put in practice what a happiness. That's what Confucius said. But again, he probably most of people don't read this. But anyway, I think I have to stop here. And Joe, you want to? Hey, where's Joe? Disappear? Okay. So so in this case, I probably have to end today's section, and then thank you everyone. And then next week we will have a different situation, different way of reading, and then we will. I think I'm going to continue immediately for the Confucius Analect. So anyway, thank you everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. I'll see you next week.